ghosts and goblins, welcome back to Shock Horror Theatre. My name is Ruben Crowley, and this is my review for Night of the Reaper. And I know exactly what you're thinking, dear viewers. Just what the hell is this movie? And I'm so glad that you asked. Night of the Reaper is a 2025 slasher horror movie directed by Brandon Christensen and starring Jessica Clements, Ryan Robbins, Summer H. Howell, Keegan Connor Tracy, Matty Finoki, Max Christensen, Bryn Samuel, and Ben Cockle. The story begins when a babysitter called Emily is killed by a masked figure. We then follow college student Dina as she agrees to babysit the young son of a sheriff named Rodney Arnold. No relation to Tom Arnold, I imagine, but this sheriff is dealing with a little mystery of his own, involving snuff films delivered to him. And for fear that the actual Grim Reaper will come after me this evening should I spoil the story for this movie, let's just move on to reviewing this slasher film the only way I know how. Badly. And let's start with what I absolutely loved about Night of the Reaper. Now, I already gave you a little hint as to what this film is actually about, but let me tell you, dear viewers, this film has plenty of twists and turns to keep you guessing. Yes, if you're intelligent like I am, you may figure out who the killer themselves is, but I can assure you that's one of only many twists that this movie has to offer. The narrative itself was rather fantastic and took me back to a much simpler time in the 1990s, when we got absolute classics of the genre like I Know What You Did Last Summer, Scream, Valentine, 1,275,000 sequels to Halloween, as well as many others. And this film features elements borrowed rather lovingly from most of the movies I just mentioned. It's a little bit I Know What You Did Last Summer, it's a whole load Scream. Oop, there's a bit that reminds me of John Carpenter's Halloween. But I can assure you, dear viewers, the film does have some original playing cards up its sleeve. To go with an absolutely fabulous story, we also have some fabulous central performances. Most notably from the characters of Dina and the Sheriff Rodney Arnold. You know, I always thought the name Rodney would be quite appropriate for a rodent of some kind, like a rat. A rodent rat called Rodney. Now there's a vocal warm-up if ever I heard one. Anyway, the performances here across the board are rather good. In fact, I would say they're probably better than what we've come to expect from your typical slasher movie. The movie has an absolutely fabulous soundtrack as well. In fact, at points you may think to yourself, was this film's soundtrack composed by John Bloody Carpenter? And, spoilers, it wasn't. Though it certainly sounded like it was. I also particularly appreciated that though while this film takes place in the 1980s, it doesn't throw that fact in your face, featuring none of the usual 80s songs that you would come to expect in a slasher movie. In fact, unless you're paying particular attention, you might not even notice that this film is set in the 1980s. But if you are paying attention, you'll notice that the child who's being babysat is playing an Atari, there's a RoboCop poster on one of the walls, and no one is using a bloody cellular telephone. All in all, I absolutely loved this movie. But was there anything I didn't love so much? Well, rather like John Carpenter's original 1978 Halloween, this film doesn't have the biggest body count we might expect from a modern slasher movie. Some of the kills are sadly off-screen, and it isn't the most violent movie out there. Though, there is one particular death in the film that, took me rather by surprise. Sorry, I'm just imagining your reaction when you get to that particular scene for yourselves. Also, if you're not a fan of animals dying in horror movies, particularly dogs, there is a couple of prop dead dogs in this film. Though thankfully we don't actually see any dogs die, so that's a relief. But honestly, this might be one of the best slasher movies I've seen in a hell of a long time. It subverted my expectations, it had some great acting, a fabulous soundtrack, no explicit nudity, which I'm not going to hold against the film too much. But while you're waiting for Scream 7 to release, this might be just a film to scratch that slasher hitch of yours. Did I just say hitch instead of itch? Damn it! Therefore, I'm going to declare that Night of the Reaper is spooktacular. So there you have it, ghouls and ghosts, another review by yours truly. If you enjoyed this little review of mine, don't forget to give me a thumbs up. If you haven't enjoyed it, well then, you can feel free to give me a thumbs down. And in the words of Willie Shakespeare, remember, the Grim Reaper wears no crown, but all kings must bow to him.